And welcome back to Wandering Through Wayne's World. With me is Tadeusz Falepa.
Falepa, correct.
I had to say that real fast because I would never remember. It would never come out right. And this gentleman's got such an interesting story, which he has put into a book called Limited Duty.
Correct.
Okay, so I'm going to call you Ted.
That is fine.
It's what's going to be. This is what I'm going to do. Okay? Okay. So you decided to write a book. What was the base behind the book?
Well, the reason I wrote the book was my father was getting up in age, and I wanted to know about his World War II experiences. He was a stateside soldier that was active during World War II, and I wanted to know where he was at, what he did, and that type of stuff. Growing up, he had always made stories and regaled us with different things that he had done while he was growing up, but his military history kind of was glanced over. And so about 12 years ago, I decided to sit down with my dad and go through everything that he did chronologically regarding his military service. And it was during that period he was telling me stories that he had never brought up before, and I had compiled several that I thought were very good. And I went to a writing course one weekend, and a New York Times bestselling author asked if anybody had kind of an outline for a book, and I presented this author with my notes, and she said, "That is a very interesting book." She says, "It's a $1 million seller," and I was kind of surprised. She says, "But from your notes, I know nothing of your father." So she says, "Can you find ways to expand upon that?" So that went back to interviewing my father and learning more about him, and not just the stories, but the reasons he did what he did in his stories.
Okay, so is this book based on his military career?
It's based on his. It's based on his service during World War II. It starts off. It does discuss his early life. So you leading up to what it was that he his decisions he made, and then it primarily, the majority of the book is about what he did during World War II.
Okay, so let's kind of open the door and find out. Army, Navy, what was he?
My father was in the Army when the war broke out, when the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor. My father was in college. He had received a scholarship to play football.
Oh, wow.
And he was studying to be a mechanical engineer. His goal, he was from the Detroit area, and he wanted to work for one of the auto industries, and he thought mechanical engineering was his best bet. But he also, he was a farmer, and he didn't have the money to go to college, but he was quite athletic. He did very well, and he received a scholarship to play football. And after his freshman year, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, and like a lot of men his age, he decided to enlist.
So he enlisted.
Right, he enlisted, and he got rejected. He enlisted in the Army Air Corps at first, and he was rejected.
Okay.
So then he enlisted with the Marines. Again, he was rejected. So he wanted to enlist so that he could choose which branch he wanted to serve, but he ended up getting drafted into the United States Army, and he was assigned the designation of limited duty, which meant that he would never be allowed to go into combat. His service would be, strictly stateside, and that for him it was very frustrating. It was what he wanted to do. He wanted to go into combat. He couldn't understand why. He was healthy. He was, he could do all the things that everybody else was doing. The only issue he had was he had one eye. My father lost an eye in a childhood accident at the age of 2, and he had worn a prosthetic eye since the age of 5.
Oh.
And so that was one of the reasons why they gave him the designation that they did. And it was something that troubled him. He never thought of himself as being handicapped or disabled, but yet the military looked upon it as that.
Played football.
Yes, he played football.
Got a scholarship.
Yep, he played football. He got a scholarship. He also played hockey and had received a tryout with the New York Rangers. So having only one eye was not an issue for my
Right.
father. He ended up where, also because of limited duty, he was not allowed to participate in any training drills that involved a firearm or any weaponry. My father totally ignored that, and he received a marksman grade in rifle and in pistol, and he also went through the bayonet course, and he did everything, and he had earned scores that were higher than most of the people in the recruits who were going through
With 2 eyes.
with 2 eyes. And so that was his issue, and so he tried, and the book kind of talks about he made several attempts to get his designation changed, and some of them were humorous, and I have to give him credit, they were innovative. It wasn't until 1944 where it was his last ditch effort, and an officer said, "I think I know a way to get you in. I will put you down as a cook, and we're heading overseas." So they changed my father's designation from where he was. He was working in ordnance, and he became a cook. And before you get sent overseas, you have to take a final physical. Again, took the final physical, and of course he was rejected because he only had one eye. So now he was a cook, and he was not a cook.
And you stateside.
And he was stateside. And luckily, the men at the camp where he was at, the cooks all knew him, and they knew him because my father ran a gambling casino on the base.
Jack of many trades.
He was a jack of many trades, and he ran this casino with a partner, and my father's base pay during that time was about $48 a month, and he was sending home between $300 to $500 a month on his gambling operation. Eventually, it was discovered. An officer who had lost a large amount of money kind of complained to a commanding officer, and this commanding officer brought my father and his partner into his office and wanted to know, what was going on, because he said, "I'm going to court-martial you. You're going to get a dishonorable discharge, and I'm going to send you to Leavenworth." And my father thought, "Oh, great, my life is over." And he says, "But," he says, "on one condition." He goes, "I'll ignore all of this. If you give me all your gambling equipment and set it up in the officers' mess, or excuse me, in the officers' club, on the weekend, the officers get paid." The officers got paid on a different day than the regular men.
Okay.
And so my father and his friend agreed to that. And then the officer also asked, he said, "I want the slot machines not to kick back anything." And my father said, "I can't do that. The lowest I can go is 5%. So that's what he did. And my father said that this captain made a bundle in the 2 years that he ran this operation. And as did my father. He did very well. And one of the things that he received from this running this gambling operation, one soldier got in over his head quite substantially. And my father said, "Hey, I can't extend you any more credit." And he says, "Well, I have a motorcycle." And he says, "I'll give you the title." And my father said, "Okay, I'll take the title." And he said, the gentleman asked, he says, "Don't sell it, because I'll pay you back the money. I'll get it." Well, my father, he said 2 weeks later, the man was shipped out, and he never paid him back. So my father had a Harley Davidson motorcycle, and he was thinking, what am I going to do with this thing? Well, he was working in ordnance, and he had access to all sorts of tools, and he started working on the motorcycle. And during that time, a mechanic came by and said, "Wow, I used to work on one of those." And my dad looked at him. He says, "What do you mean?" He says, "Before the war, I was a mechanic at Harley Davidson in Milwaukee."
Wow.
And his name was he was a private McCluskey. So my father said, "Listen, this is what I'll arrange. If you help me fix this up, get it up into a running condition, whenever I'm not using it, you can use it." And that's what they did. And my father says they stripped it down, they sandblasted it, repainted the whole thing, made it into a shining example. They had flames on the side. He says it was wonderful, and he and this gentleman used it, and they shared it. Eventually, my father was transferred to a different base, and he gave the motorcycle to McCluskey as a gift.
Wow.
And he goes, you did more work than I. He goes, you don't owe me anything. So that's what he did. So those were some of the stories that he had.
It's interesting because, we take some of the things that we go through in life, and some people use them as a handicap, and some people use them as a blessing. I have been through a lot. I lost 40% of my lung function, filming a reality show, and I don't let it get to me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I have a handicap thing because I live in Florida, and the air gets so thick that sometimes I can't walk. But on a whole, I don't need to park in a handicap.
Mm-hmm.
I had triple bypass and a heart attack about a year and a half ago, and I still run circles around everybody else. Okay, I'm old enough to retire,
Mm-hmm.
but yet I won't. Okay, your dad had that, in my opinion, your dad had that in him.
Yes.
Okay, I don't know that I would enlist. And surely they would throw me out, but that's a whole nother story. But I love the fact that, and things I mean it, and maybe not as it comes out, but your dad was a hustler.
Yes, he was. He always came out ahead. That was one of the things that he did, and it really benefited him. And I kind of laugh. People ask about, what's your favorite story in the book? And I said, well, it's really a non-military story. My father grew up on a farm, and his job was to pick produce and get it ready for market on a Friday. And my grandfather worked at the Ford Rouge steel mill in blast furnace number 7. So he worked there at night and farmed during the day, so he got very little sleep. Well, he came home on a Friday night, and the car was parked in the pickup truck was parked at the farm, and my grandfather came into my dad's room and said, "What are you doing? How come you're not, at the farmer's market? You're supposed to drive down there." And my father says, "Well, I was driving into the city, and I got stopped by the police, and they asked me for a license, and they said, you don't have a license, so you can't drive within the city." My father ended up, my father and grandfather went to the farmer's market, sold all their produce, and they went to the police station to find out what my dad had to do to get a driver's license. Well, the police said, "We've never given a driver's license to someone so young." He was 8 years old.
Oh my God.
So one of the officers said, "This is what we'll do. If he can turn over the crank on a Model T Ford, we'll give him a license." So my father, at age of 8, grabbed the crank with both hands, turned it over, and got it started. And they said, "He's man enough to turn over a car. He's man enough to have a license." So he got the license at the age of 8, and he drove for 88 years till he was 96.
And again, you heard that whole story. Okay, here he is getting a driver's license at 8, one eye. Okay,
Yep.
turning the crank of a Model T, which is not easy. Okay, he didn't take any of his life as a handicap.
No, he did not. And, I'm very proud of the man that he is. In the book, you'll find out that he practiced judging a man by their content of their character other than their skin color. When he was working in ordnance, his responsibility was over a group of black mechanics. And he had been assigned that duty because there had been issues. And my father was not liked because the head of the ordnance department was from the South. My father was a Yankee. He was white, and he had no issues working with the blacks. Well, eventually, he became very, very close with these people, and he developed a relationship. And everything was going along smoothly, he said, until 1943, June 15th of 1943, there was a race riot in Beaumont, Texas. And many of the blacks that were working on the base, their homes were destroyed by the KKK. And my father was there because the mayor of the city of Beaumont contacted the governor of the state of Texas. He says, "What can I do? I don't have a police department that's can handle this riot." They said, "Well, we'll call Camp Wallace and we'll see if they can disperse some troops." And my dad was one of those people that was dispersed. And he actually saw some of the men that were working underneath him. They saw him marching through the city to try to disperse this riot. And he says the relationship after that was never the same.
You know, it's a shame that there aren't more people like him. My wife is Canadian,
Okay.
and they're colorblind,
Yes.
okay? There is no thought in my wife's mind of black, white, red, green. I grew up from a very prejudiced household. I don't have that in me, okay? So it's a little different for me because I grew up seeing bad in black, bad in white, bad in green. There's bad
yes.
everywhere.
That's right.
But, you know, you're going back to a time, we're a lot more liberal today. You're
Yes.
going back to a time where it wasn't really prejudice, it just was the way it was.
Yes.
Okay? And he chose it not to be the way it was. He chose it in seeing blacks as blacks, and they're just the same as whites.
Yes.
He chose it as seeing, I have one eye, you have two, but there's no difference between us.
Yes.
Okay? And then he chose it as, your green money is really important to me, so I'm hoping to concede. I get it.
You know, and that was it. He always looked, and that was something that he instilled in both myself and my sisters. My wife, as you can see, was outside the studio, and
Okay.
she's a woman of color.
Okay.
And it's my second marriage, and she was a little hesitant to meet my parents for the first time. And when my dad saw her, he just loved on her. And he told her, he says, I've never seen color. Now, my father, after the war, he worked at Ford Motor Company. He spent 40 years as a mechanical engineer at Ford Motor Company, and he was the head of the engine department. And he was part of the experimental vehicles division. He knew all the people. He played with, you know, Lee Iacocca, Carl Shelby, Penske. He knew all the big wigs that were, you know, that type of thing. He was one of the three men who developed the first Ford Mustang in 1961.
Oh, wow, cool.
And from 1956 to 1986, when he retired, he was responsible for the engine that went into the presidential limousine.
Oh.
And so there's a picture in the book of my dad and my mother standing in front of, I believe it's the Reagan presidential limousine, and he was responsible for the engine. So he has an FBI file. He knows things that he could never disclose to even me. But yes, I mean, that was the thing. He had never let himself, he never, again, thought of himself as being disabled or having a handicap. And the funny thing is, at Ford Motor Company, he went to apply for a job at Ford Motor Company, and he walked in and said the HR man looked at him and said, I can't hire you, you only have one eye. And so my father said he got it from the table, walked to the door, closed it, turned around, and he told the gentleman in HR, he said, either I get a job or you're leaving here by stretcher. He actually threatened the HR guy, and he says that's how he got into Ford Motor Company. Even though they thought, even though he had one eye, they looked at him as being somehow unintelligent. Because they look at you as being disabled or having a handicap, and that has nothing to do with your intelligence.
It's so ridiculous. Okay, there's an area called Lake Park, and there's a gentleman who's handicapped, extremely handicapped. And if it wasn't for this gentleman, Lake Park would still be, excuse my language, the crap place that it was. He renovated everything. He fixed up everything. He used his ideas to make a theater, get new restaurants, a brewery in there, and everything. You know, we discount people for what we believe are things that aren't normal. But who are we to say what's normal? There is nothing more loving than a child with Down syndrome. We don't need to teach them to be like us. We need us to learn how to be like them. Okay, and that's the thing. We're running out of time, and what I wanted to say was, you heard a teeny little piece of a gentleman's life that was full of challenges that he overcame, ideas that he put into effect, and ended up living. How old was he when he put?
He was 98 years old. He was 41 days short of his 99th birthday when he passed.
Okay. And lived a life raising a family, working, doing some amazing cool stuff, okay? And never let the little, and this is the little bit I know from what you're saying, never let the little things became a big issue in his life,
Correct.
okay? Definitely a story worth reading. How do people find the book?
Well, they can go out to my site. I am on Weebly, and you can go out to my Tadeusz Furlepa, and that's TADEOUS Furlepa .weebly.com. And my book can be found on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. It's limited duty. Type that in, and you can find it there. It's both in a paperback and in Kindle book form.
And just so you know, just like every author that comes through here, we won't let them leave without signing it to us. So that's just our rule, because we want to read it. So, and again, for me, the story sounds so interesting. And one reason is, I'm 5'2", and a lot of people would see that as a handicap. And I lived a great life. My wife is 5'10".
Okay.
Okay, she's a big girl, and she doesn't see me as 5'2".
No.
Okay, I have been blessed to do things that most can't, who are 6 foot. All right, so I got rejected from the basketball team. It's okay. I was okay with that. Okay, but you got to really admire somebody like your dad, who we only heard, like I said, a little bit of what he's done in his life. And the saddest part of the whole thing is for him. He never got to do the thing he wanted to do, which was be in active combat.
Correct.
But yet he made a whole life for himself and a family. With that, Ted, I want to thank you for coming on.
Wayne, thank you so much.
Check out the book. The numbers and everything are on the screen. And we'll be back.
Thanks.